So we've got some really cool stuff going down with our Facebook group. I don't know if you've seen, but it's really coming alive. We're creeping up to 100 members in there talking all about being a fundy teeny bobber.
Yeah, and that's great. We're growing the congregation, you might say. But what I guess, or maybe not. But look, it is good, and there's been some really good conversations with people. And look, some people you are still engaged and very much in the faith. Some people aren't, and there's all in between. So it's really been good to see people interacting and lots of different flavours happening there. I'm loving it.
Yeah, and there's a lot of really fun stuff coming up in that group too, which I think would be great talking points. But there's some names, preacher names, Christian pop star names, all that sort of stuff's coming along. And there's people that are lurking, right? So they're not getting into it, they're just there and they're just watching. So we just want to encourage people to come along and be a part of that, even if it's just to lurk. But on that note, someone else who's part of the group, who is our guest tonight, I might hand over to you, B, and you can tell everyone who we've got. I'm a bit excited.
We're incredibly excited about this one. So we have with us Anthony Venn-Brown, which we have been definitely putting out there on socials and tweeting it and on Facebook and all those other mediums that, T is really the king of, let's be honest. Anthony wrote a best-selling book back in 2004 called A Life of Unlearning, A Journey to Find the Truth. So we're going to find out some of those truths tonight. So it's exciting time. So Anthony, I'm just going to hand over to you. You tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you?
First of all, I should say that I feel incredibly honoured to be your first guest on your amazing podcast.
Yay!
Clap, podcast, Cherry. It's amazing.
And
popped out cherry, did you say? Goodness me.
Okay, moving on. Also, I've listened to a number of your podcasts already in your conversations, and I just want to say that I love what you guys are doing. I like the spirit of it. I think that this is a place where people can find healing and resolution as opposed to being further traumatized. So good on you. Now, about me.
About you. Tell us. Who are you?
A lot of people would, and some people listening to this would know me as Tony Venn-Brown.
That I knew you as Tony Venn-Brown first. Tony, I think it was about 1989 when I first saw you speak. Mm-hmm. A while ago.
I know you as Tony Venn-Brown too when you were disparaging the Muppets in about 91.
Yeah, that was me.
Yeah, and I think I have said this online that and in a previous episode that I went to, I think it was one your evangelism, maybe a seminar or something like that, and I bought a tape set which was about Star Wars and its connection to the New Age, and I was destroyed by that, Tony, because
it ruined Star Wars for you. But if you read his book, you'll know that it was a Sunday sermon. Maybe twice on Sunday, followed by a 2-day Every Believer Evangelism workshop, which I did exactly that. I went along and
did you?
Yeah, got all strong in my faith.
I do encourage people to read the book. And before we get into you telling us a little bit about yourself, Anthony, and where you've been, where you come from, and we'll eventually get to where things are now, I encourage people to read the book. Like it's I think people will be able to relate on many levels and be able to, particularly around some of that stuff that we've spoken about in previous podcasts about, I guess, the church maybe being a bit of an ungraceful space. And I think it will help people to sort of grapple with some of that and some of that thing that I guess we've tried to concentrate on is more of a healing environment. We don't want to get dug down and stuck in that bitterness. We want to be able to find ways forward and help people to find ways forward and contextualize that stuff from back then.
Exactly right. And we've paid all this money to fly him here tonight. So over to you, Anthony Venn-Brown. Who are you?
Yeah. So people who knew me as Tony Venn-Brown would have known me during my preaching days, which were predominantly in the mid-70s to 1991 was when I actually resigned. I did a name change in 1999 because I had had such a profound change in my life I didn't really feel I was Tony Venn-Brown anymore, that everyone knew me as. So I went back to use my original name, Anthony. So to give people the Reader's Digest snapshot. What I used to be was a very, very high-profile preacher within, as you call it, the Great AOG. Is that what you call it?
The Great Big AOG.
The Great Big AOG. I was ordained as an Assemblies of God preacher, but I pioneered churches, and I came to Sydney and began evangelistic ministry, and it just kept on growing and growing. And so I used to preach in all the mega churches of like Hillsong, and in Melbourne, Richmond, and then of course Adelaide with Andrew Evans's church, Paradise. But that was what I did. I had an open pulpit, actually, at some of those churches, to go, I'm free this weekend. Do you want a preacher? Or if I had a particular message I felt was time to deliver, I could talk with any of those pastors, Brian Houston or, Andrew Evans or Phil Hills, and also throughout Australia. So I was pretty well known. And that was about me being a full-time evangelist, which was quite rare in those days. People had tried that before unsuccessfully and gone back to pastoral ministry because of the pressures of the evangelistic itinerant ministry. So I was one of the first in the world to go through what people have become known today as conversion therapy program.
You're referring to the gay conversion therapy?
Gay conversion therapy, ex-gay reparative therapy, by many names, but same era. And so 1972, I went through that. So that was, some people will be familiar with Exodus. So that was like 4 years before Exodus was founded. I'm trying to change my sexual orientation. And it was my sexual orientation that brought me into the Christian experience.
And that's a good segue into that, because I was just going to ask a similar thing. Tell us about your journey into the Christian experience and the fundamentalist scene.
Right. Okay. So we're talking 1969, beginning of 69. Actually, 1968, I was going through a horrendous time in my final year at high school.
Yeah.
My same-sex orientation was at the fore, and I was struggling with it, and I was doing things I wasn't happy with, things that were dangerous. I mean, you could get caught and go to jail. Mental health professionals would do all sorts of things to try and cure you. And so this was very scary. And I knew two things. Number one, I should keep this a secret. And number two, I should do everything possible to try and change that. The depression it all just got too much, and I tried to take my life. And when that was discovered, then I went to see a psychiatrist. And he listened and he took notes, and he told me I was going through a stage and I just need to be closer to my dad, and work on that relationship. But I knew it wasn't right. I knew that was not going to be like that. And it was during the school holidays I went to a Christian camp.
Okay.
No, we know all about that one. We know all about these Christian camps.
And actually it was I went as a counsellor, like as a person who, was to look after these young kids. And what I discovered was, of course, this was an evangelical thing, and they're talking about this Jesus as though he was actually still around.
Yeah, okay.
And I wasn't used to that. I was used to talk about Jesus as a historical figure, and the parables and the Bible stories. So it was at that camp one night, I just walked down to the beach alone, and I cried out to God, and I said, God, my life is an absolute mess, but if you want it, you can have it. There's that. And that was, I came back from that place, on a high, and felt that I had the born again experience.
So around this time, you're around 17, I'm guessing, last year of high school?
Just about to turn 18 in March. Turned 18 in March.
So true to form, you were in fact a teenage fundamentalist.
I was full on
Welcome to the show.
Sydney Anglican evangelical, slipped into the Baptist, slipped into the and so I was around in the early days of the charismatic movement, the very first things of the charismatic movement in Sydney, which were really fascinating. The healing service and their prayer meetings going on and speaking. All this thing was really quite new. And then there was this. Then I slipped over into the Pentecostal world. My first Pentecostal church I went to was Petersham Assemblies of God.
Oh, okay.
Where the ladies wore hats and gloves and the men wore suits. And there was a piano and organ. There were no drums because they were demonic. It was like, oh my God, like this is, and no sport. Yeah, we're talking holiness Pentecostal.
So this is very different to the AOG or Australian Christian churches that people would be familiar with now, which essentially are rock bands at services and the like. So, what happened there?
Well, what happened there was, I had a bit to do with that, but, what would be fascinating would be to transport somebody from that era, from somewhere like Petersham Assemblies of God, one of those AOG churches, into a church that you would go to today at Hillsong or any of the mega churches. They would run out of the building screaming at how this was demonic, it is such a different contrast to what they would have known. That, it's really fascinating, those two things.
Isn't that funny? Because I think, and I've talked to this a little bit before about the historylessness, where we just think that, Pentecostalism is just picked up exactly where Jesus and the disciples left off. And it's so too with looking at it like this, that I think most people that are involved in Pentecostalism would think, oh, it's always been this way.
Mm-mm.
But you're saying no.
No way at all. And I've written about this to contrast. I mean, women in ministry. These days, the pastor's wife is usually your preacher as well. And, you clothing, even you couldn't go to university because you'd lose your faith. All these strange things.
That actually did happen to me, but move on.
It actually did. This is true.
Didn't you get the warning? Don't go to university because you lose your faith, because you have to use your brain.
That's right. So obviously that was a fairly transformative time in the 1970s within the Pentecostal scene.
Yeah, it was really, it was quite exciting because, first of all, there was my conversion experience, which was really quite transformative and very exhilarating and emotional. And then there was a charismatic movement, which was a whole new world of excitement and healings and prophecies and speaking in tongues. And then the convention started and the numbers grew, and, so, but all the time, of course, I was battling with this thing inside my desire to have sex with men, which was not what the Bible, so I thought the Bible said I should be doing. And I was, battling behind the scenes with that constantly.
So you carried that with you basically through your whole journey, right? So this isn't something that you chose. It wasn't something that you decided upon. This was just who you were.
Yeah, it begins about 15, the age of 15 probably. When you reach puberty, you realize you're either attracted to guys or girls, or you're attracted to both. And as that sexual awakening happens in the consciousness, and it wasn't happening for me for girls. And so it began there 15 and went right through my life till the age of 40, when I actually finally fell in love with a guy. And that was the big wake-up call to me, that all those over 20 years of doing everything possible, programs, prayer and fast, you name it, exorcisms, I'd done it all. And here I was now fully in love, and I was so tired.
Yeah. What did that do for you? 21, 22 years of of carrying that with you,
Pretending.
pretending. I guess. How did you do? What did you do to process that and deal with it?
I think that my way of living with that was compartmentalization.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there are some preachers out there which are just assholes, you know, who are deceiving and, you know, they're preaching stuff that they don't believe. I wasn't one of those people. You know, I was very genuine, very sincere about what I preached and had a high level of integrity within my ministry. For example, you know, financially, we were squeaky clean. I saw other preachers playing, you know, manipulating congregations and audiences and doing things on altar calls which would, not really very good. I could never do that.
When you saw that, did you ever confront that?
No, that was their stuff, yeah.
You know, it's interesting, like that whole the culture, I guess, that we've spoken about before. You know, I mean, you wonder if there can be change if people aren't challenging that, and that's not a criticism of you, Anthony. It's just I just wonder, because we don't have a culture within the churches of actually being approachable to be able to call things out. How will things ever change?
Well, there was also the whole touch not the Lord's anointed, right? And I don't know what it was like being another one of the Lord's anointed. I certainly wasn't when I saw stuff going on. And, you know, if you did call people out or start to even, you know, and they would call it gossip because there was no formal channels, right? So you just started talking to other people. And when you did, you'd hear that, oh, touch not the Lord's anointed, brother, you know, oh, that's God's business.
Yeah. And some of these people were my friends and peers.
No.
You know, and I saw them pushing people over, and I saw, no, I can't do that. So I compartmentalize this thing. As long as I am fighting this thing behind the scenes, I can keep preaching because this is really what I want to do. You know, and everyone has their struggles, and I've got my struggles. Yeah. But there did come a point where I went, I'm not going to struggle with this anymore because nothing's changed. And from that point on, I couldn't preach anymore because that, to me, would have been hypocritical.
So, Anthony, did you see it as like Paul's thorn in the flesh? Is that how you treated this? This was the thing to keep you humble. This was the thing, or not?
I went through a whole range, a collection of different beliefs trying to work out why I wasn't changing as I desired and as I prayed. The thorn in the flesh was one of those things younger in my Christian experience. I adopted that for a while, trying to manage the internal conflict I was going through. But after a while, I dropped that because, you know, the thorn in the flesh was not necessarily a sin in my book.
So you were saying that it does, yeah. I guess I'm curious. You wanted to be an evangelist. What was it? What attracted you to that evagelism, winning people over, I guess, to Jesus?
I think that you guys would relate to this as well. That it is a sense of mission. There's a sense of calling. You feel that God has something for me, and I'm not just going to be, and I think one of you guys have used this term, a pew warmer.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do that. I'll be completely sold out for Jesus, and I believe that I do have a calling on my life to do something. It's interesting, isn't it, in Romans it says the gifts and calling of God are irrevocable.
You stuck with that for life.
And I think there's actually a lot of truth in that.
Yeah.
Because, you know, people will often say, you're still an evangelist.
I was just going to say that. I was going to say, you're still evangelical for a cause. Yeah.
So if you have some natural gifts, natural abilities, there is that side of it, but then there's a vocational calling side of it. Well, that still is there, isn't it, to the natural stuff. is still there and will be there for the rest of your life if you decide to operate in it.
Yeah. And look, I mean, when people choose a particular vocation, it's usually led by the fact that they've got their heroes, their inspirations. Who were yours leading you into that space? Did you have some?
That's a good question.
We can come back to it.
I can't think of anybody except, Billy Graham, maybe.
I thought you were going to say Jesus then, and I was going to slap you. But okay, Billy Graham.
Yeah, I think probably, but because it was just.
So what was it? What was it then, Anthony, that was attractive to you about the ministry? Besides the sense of, like, what made you think, I'm going to do this as a job, I'm going to do this as a full-time pursuit?
Because of the internal reward that you knew you were serving God, and the honor of doing that, what a blessing it is to do that, and and that you're going to make a difference in people's lives, and of course, that we were going to save people from hell.
Yeah. So a sense of purpose, a sense of meaning, actually doing good by other people. That is, rescuing them. And yeah, I mean, I can totally relate to all those things, and also the sense of, the ultimate purpose that you're working for God. I mean, there's no stepping up from that, is there?
Oh, as an evangelist, I believed in heaven and hell, and my role was to preach the good news, which was that Jesus Christ, death on the cross, was the substitute for men's sin, and that they would, by receiving the gift of salvation, they would not go to hell. So that's what an evangelist does.
I feel like I'm in your workshop again, by the way. I'm just writing all this down. I remember there was hand signals. We had to make a little heart and hold it up and all this kind of stuff. No, is that a different one? Okay, maybe I'm mixing things up. But you made us do little gestures whilst you were helping us remember what it is that we needed to say.
You know what? If I listen to the tapes again, that would be interesting. I haven't gone there for, when was that? 1990 would have been the last time I was there, so 30 years ago.
Have you listened to anything since then, from back then?
I do have some sermons I preached at Paradise on DVD, and I have loaded one up on YouTube. There are others that I won't load up. I'm just too embarrassed about.
So Paradise, just quickly, Paradise is Adelaide, South Australia, correct? And is that the precursor to Planet Shakers, or is that just not quite connected to Planet Shakers? Because I know that it's the Evans boys that were involved with Paradise and now doing Planet Shakers, right?
Right, yes. So Andrew Evans, who was a superintendent of the great big AOG, was the pastor at Paradise. And in those days, it was one of the leading mega churches, if not the leading mega church in Australia. And Ashley and who was the other son of
Russell? Was it Russell?
Yeah.
David was a cousin, I think. Hi, guys. If you're listening.
David,
So tell me, though, one thing I'm really keen to know is Youth Alive, because that was a big part of my AOG experience, and you were involved in the recreation, formation, whatever you want to call it. You were a big name in that. Can you tell me about that?
Let me tell you the story about Youth Alive.
Please.
Oh, we can't wait.
Because I think I may have been written out of the history of this.
That's interesting.
So
we've got a scoop, people. Just stand by for the scoop.
So what happened? Here's exactly what happened. Was that there was a group within Sydney Assemblies of God churches called Ambassadors for Christ.
Okay.
Sorry, not what's it called?
Christ Ambassadors, was it?
Christ Ambassadors. That was it.
Yeah.
Christ Ambassadors. That was the combined youth organisation, and the executive of the Assemblies of God said to me, "We want you to take this over and do something with it, because you've got a good youth ministry." I'm going, well, I've just started every believer evangelism. Okay, I'll do that for a period of time. So I took that over, and we did outreaches. We, in A Life of Unlearning, my autobiography, I talk about the first one that we did, and how I had youth leaders walking out and praying against me outside the auditorium.
Because of the drums and the rock and roll music, which now is just par for the course.
Yep. And then on the Monday morning, I got hauled before the executive to explain what I had done, and that they told me that I needed to stop this nonsense of rock music and everything else. And I don't know what happened, but I sort of became very strong. I said, well, that's okay, but that's what I will do, and either you like it or lump it, but I'm not changing anything, because this is what these young people need to reach them.
So I'm going to write this down, right? Because really what you're basically saying is, not only did you start the whole Youth Alive thing, but you started the whole demon drums thing, right? in churches in Australia, and dare I say it, you're responsible for Hillsong, because that's all they do is canned lights and music and drums, and goodness me.
Well, that's going too far. But here's what you could say is that, yes, I promoted contemporary Christian music and fought against the conservatives to get it established within youth ministries and in churches. It was a huge controversy at that time. Like, the national executive who hated my guts because of what I believed and what I was doing. So, and I didn't found Youth Alive. I founded Youth Alive New South Wales. Okay. Mal Fletcher started Youth Alive in Victoria. And I just grabbed the name because I thought it was great. And then we connected. So then what happened was, we got up to a point where we had the city town hall with 2,000 people in it. This had never, ever happened before. A big youth rally. It was incredible. Exciting days, all within 12 months. And then after a while, I realized I can't do the Every Believer evangelism. I can't do the Youth Alive. I need to now hand it over to somebody. And I tried to get a guy from New Zealand, Paul Young's brother, Mark, to take it over. But of course, there was no money in it. I wasn't being paid anything to do this. I was all doing it by faith. And so there's nothing to attract him financially. He didn't take that on. And Pat Masiti was my assistant. Yeah. And I handed it over to Pat. And then he took it off. And then when I resigned from the ministry, he used to say, he founded Youth Alive. There were times my daughters were sitting in Youth Alive rallies, and he would be introduced as the founder of Youth Alive. And my daughters were feeling really hurt because they knew that my dad did that.
Yeah, and not to mention, I do remember seeing Pat Masiti speak, and he used to do the sun walk, because at the time,
instead of the
Michael
moonwalk,
Jackson was doing the moonwalk, so he did the sun walk. So Anthony, as long as you didn't found the sun walk, I think that's a good thing.
And do you remember there was a Youth Alive tape that was out, and he got on there and did a rap, and he said, "I'm the cat they all call Pat," which was pretty clever rhyming, really. Had he worked Matt into that as well, I would have been really impressed. And I remember coming in, that was one of my first Youth Alive rallies, I think, where I saw him do that. And I remember sitting there, coming from a, club, nightclubs and, dancing and the whole bit, and loving music like Soul to Soul and Adamski and this kind of stuff, and just sitting there just looking at him, just going, this is it. Of course, in my mind, couldn't say this out loud, just going, you're fucked. That's just so bad. You know what I mean? It's like everything that's wrong with Christianity just happened on that stage.
Yeah, I'm cringing a
What
bit.
is the sun? What's the sun walk?
Well, you know how the moonwalk, Michael Jackson was very smooth walking back. Pat Mesiti would come and do the sun walk and tentatively come on and tap around as if he was walking on the hot sun. So it was.
But wasn't it
quite tacky.
SON? I thought it was SON, the sun walk.
Yeah, I think there was a little bit of naff put in there. So and I think it was. Unfortunately, it was just.
Yeah.
It was a bit embarrassing. But how did that make you feel, Anthony? That here you are. You've started
your
something
thunder.
big. You've put your heart and soul into this, and here's someone else taking the glory for it.
Yeah, that was hard to take. That was hard to take. I felt, I mean, at that stage when I heard of that happening, I had lots of stuff that was one of the minor hurts compared to many of the other hurts that I'd had. So, I felt for my daughters who had to go through that, to hear that on the stage, everyone cheering, and they're knowing what we had all been through, and that what was actually being said was a lie, was not very pleasant for them.
You just said just then that was one of the minor hurts. What were some of the other hurts? Tell us about any of those stories.
I have to just pause a moment because they are the darkest days of my life.
Yeah.
And the first chapter of A Life of Unlearning is that very day where I'm standing up in front of hundreds of people and confessing that I've committed adultery and resigning from the ministry and giving away the very last thing that I had, which was a bit of self-respect. And the trauma of that put me in a state of shock whereby I cried for 3 weeks.
So, guys, on that note, we've actually come to the end of our time. So why don't we just, as the Americans say, put a pin in it, and let's pick this up in the next episode, which we're going to drop today as well. We're going to drop at the same time as we're dropping this episode, so feel free to binge this, people. But I reckon we hang that right there, and we're going to come back and we're going to talk in our next episode all about Anthony's trauma, really, and we're going to talk about how he dealt with that and how he moved forward, and also about what he's doing now. How does that sound, guys?
Great segue.
Perfect.
Okay.
You should be on
fantastic.
radio.
or maybe a podcast. All right, so I'll see you guys in a minute, and we'll see everyone else in a minute too.
Sure.
See ya.